Black Star has made a comment. He said, Black British culture is incorporating Africans and Caribbeans, enjoying English cuisines and singing Sweet Caroline. Basically, the Commonwealth nations adapting what is British to our taste. So that ties me right into the question of...
Who is Anthony Joshua?
Well, okay. Ties me right into the question of, are African and Caribbean cultures taking over the UK? And I asked the question because when I was growing up, and I'll say West African culture, Caribbean culture, I believe in the UK is about a generation ahead of West African culture. There were maybe
two.
Yeah, maybe two. Because if you think about it, when I was going to school, the children of people that had come here were the parents of my friends.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah. Whereas my parents were the first generation coming in. So that was, and we're now seeing a lot of the second generation, third generation from West Africa.
So can I ask a question? When did they come, roughly?
My mum and dad came over about 65, 66, around 71.
Right, okay. Somewhere in that region. Yeah. So at that time, there were Caribbean babies being born in the UK. Yeah?
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Exactly.
So my mum would have fallen into that kind of, a little bit earlier than that, but she would have fallen into that bracket,
So she was born...
She was born here.
So she was born here whilst Wiley's parents were migrating.
Absolutely.
Coming over here. So your grandparents were already here is the point.
Already here.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So the reason I'm asking
Sorry, Wiley. Roughly when would you say they came?
I would say...
Just roughly.
They came 50s.
Right, okay.
Late 50s.
Late 50s. All right, so go on, Wiley.
The reason why I'm asking that, so I recognise that when I was growing up, I would say African culture, because African culture encapsulates South African, West African, Northern African, East African. That culture was not as vibrant as it is now.
All the Afcon places, yeah?
Yes, now, yeah, exactly. Now,
all of a sudden, Buddy's just like grimace.
Now, what's happening is that, like, and I think Buddy touched on it, like, there's all these restaurants about, there weren't restaurants about when I was growing up. There was, and shouts out to Yum Yums that was in Hackney, and
there was kitchens.
Oberlin. So there was takeaway places,
kitchens,
but there wasn't restaurants. Now you're seeing restaurants. Now you're seeing the music is fusing into everything. As much as I will be hearing in a song Wagwan, I'll be hearing Wahala. And there's no second guessing with anyone to say, oh, what does that mean? So my point being, it's so integrated into the culture now, it's second nature. But is that now taking over the culture of the country to say that the fashionable cultures? If you think back to the late 90s, look at you, this man sitting up, the late 90s and the late 80s, early 90s, Caribbean culture, reggae music, dancehall, it was the hype thing at the time.
What, cartini trousers and...
Yeah, which led on to, and we was talking about it earlier, jungle, drum and bass, all these things came from a fusion of house and garage, came from a fusion of dancehall. We're now seeing that with Afrobeats. Afrobeats is now fusing into house and everything else. You now have Amapiano coming from South Africa, and that's now a big thing over here. Is that culture of Caribbean culture and African culture now taking the reins of what is popular?
I think the UK, one of the UK's kind of blossoming things about the UK is that it's a melting pot in it. It has, where we're specifically talking about Black British culture.
Yes.
But that also, if you you widen the pot a bit, you're also talking about the Indians that came over and the Pakistanis and that kind of thing. And I mean, when was it? In the 90s, we had that song, ding, 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 ding. And
yes, that Jay-Z then took on. And
so it's sorry, I don't know what the song was called. So, but as soon as I did that, everybody knew Wagwan. Jay's busting up over there. But it's the way that once something gets exposed to the UK, it transforms into something else. It just organically grows into something else. Like, each of us here could say there is a mix or an Indian song that they've heard that is banging. They can hear it in a club.
An Asian song.
An Asian song, thank you very much.
Mandian to back care.
Thank you very much.
All of that.
Yeah.
All of that. What he said.
I went to a rave and they were playing some Turkish music, and it was absolutely, and I've heard it a couple times in a couple places, and I'm like, rah, this thing is banging. Same way you can go out and hear Hispanic or Spanish music that has got an English twist to it and whatnot. So I don't know if that is what, you know, the UK going out to all these countries and colonizing all these places and bringing all this thing back has caused that they've almost created a, I don't even like a mutant kind of culture within the island itself.
I think the best word you said was melting pot.
Yeah,
it's exactly that.
It's
exactly
so many different things that, I mean, we've got fusion of absolutely everything. Asian fusion, West Indian fusion, Turkish fusion. There is such a, like the plethora of food and taste buds. If you want to go out and say, yeah, you know what, I want to try something, but I don't necessarily want, the amount of things that are out there for you to actually try in the UK, it's unreal.
Tongo.
I'm going to say, I don't think that we've taken over as such, because I think Britain in its culture would always be Britain.
Futile.
However, I think we have made a big influence because we are appropriated by a lot of other cultures within England as well.
What do you mean by that?
So, if you look at cultures other than black cultures, they will appropriate they appropriate our food, they appropriate our dress sense, they appropriate our music. Like, before, if I went to a black rave, I wouldn't see no white people. And they wouldn't know the R&B songs, all the dancehall songs, all the dances, but now they do. And they're appropriating the hairstyles, they're appropriating the dress sense, they're appropriating the music, the food, they're learning to cook our food. Like, but I still don't think that we've taken over, for want of a better word,
quote unquote,
yes,
white culture above their own culture. It's just that they've appropriated a lot of what we've now brought to them, and adopted with it.
Okay.
And rolled with it.
I'll tell you what I find is, what I like about, and you mentioned Bukayo Saka, and I think it's good. What I like about that is the fact, as a British-born Nigerian, I like the fact that he hasn't had to compromise on his name. Because one of the things that, as someone who was born here in an age where people couldn't pronounce, my name is very simple to pronounce. Wale is very simple to pronounce, but it's not spelled as it is pronounced. But you got to take the time to learn to pronounce it. That time to learn to pronounce names was not given in the era that I was growing up. What I like about the world now that we live in this country is that people are being, I don't want to say they're taking the time, I think people are being forced into having to learn to pronounce names they necessarily wouldn't do before. Because the culture, to bring it back to how the culture is all around you. You can't plead ignorance if you may know a Oluwafemi, you may know a Kwame, you may know somebody with these names, and you can't say, oh, I'm going to call you K or I'm going to call you Fems. You have to call them by their given name, and there is no excuse for not doing that. I like the fact that Bukayo Saka hasn't had to try and compromise on his name, and I may have issues that he's not playing for Nigeria, but that's my own personal take. But my issue really is that someone like that can be viewed by other people born from Nigerian parentage and West African parentage and South African, North African, wherever, to say that guy's an icon. Actually, he hasn't had to compromise himself, and he's still eating pounded jam. He's still going Nigeria. He's not hiding his culture. Whereas if you go back about 20 or so years, a lot of people were trying to hide their original culture, which I think is great. I think it's great, personally.
Someone said to me that people that listen to operatic music learnt the names, and sorry, it wasn't just operatic music, it was also gymnastics and synchronized swimming
and stuff, yeah.
And all these different sports. You learnt the names of them Russian divers. Do you know what I mean? They weren't the easiest to roll off the tongue, but you learnt them names. Do you get what I mean? So if you're willing to do that, what's the difference? So I will use my whole name. You know, I wasn't blessed with having a traditional name from the motherland. I got 3 typical English names. Do you know what I mean? White English names. But for those that don't, wear it with pride. Do you get what I mean?
So that sort of ties onto my other question, which is with Black British culture being, and it's sort of a merger of two questions, but I don't want to go into this. In fact, I'll start with the second question first, actually. So in America, we look at Black Americans, and we say that they don't have a culture with a back home, if that makes sense, because a lot of them came from the slave generation. The tie only goes back as far as when they first came into the country. Whereas with those of us born over here, we can trace our roots back to our grandparents, great-grandparents, to the Caribbean islands, to the African nations, to wherever it is we came from. Do you think, though, with the generations going forward, we're going to become more and more like the US, where the ties to back home are going to become less and less and less, and the Black British culture will become more and more and more?
I think it might be the opposite, because as Citrus and yourself have pointed out, there is money to be earned, there's wealth to be earned, and there's also lessons to be learned from that. So people are now more interested into it. So one of the things that I've personally done, I did one of those ancestry tests to find out about my lineage, my heritage and stuff like that, because I'm from the Caribbean. Now, as we know, 99% of the people that are in the Caribbean, obviously we have the Arawaks and Caribs that were there originally, but a lot of the people have been brought over through slavery. So me looking into that has now given me a curiosity about my history. It's made me want to know more about Africa. It was it says I'm part Benin, I'm part Nigerian. So now, whereas...
Hey, my brother.
Hey, come on now. So I'm embarrassed to say...
That chair was weird.
That was
Yeah. Straight up.
How high was the percentage?
Poundage jump.
Do you remember
I can't
how?
remember what the exact percentages are. But whenever I